basically, there's a lot of myth that surrounds him. And I don't think maybe it's not the place to get into.
You can, there's a little bit of it.
Okay, so my grandfather was an imam in Cape Town, right, in the 60s and 50s. And he was quite progressive in his Islamic identity, right? At that time, if you were Muslim and you wanted to say something against the regime, you would link yourself with either of these other groups. My grandfather wasn't like that. He was like, no, the underpinning of this religion is to fight against oppression. So he was basically on his own on this kind of mission. He didn't do anything violent, but he was outspoken and he was traveling to gain funds. So through his travels, he would try to get money for oppressed families that he knew locally in the townships of Cape Town and in the flats. Now, the Terrorism Act was introduced in '67 in South Africa. It gave the security police leeway to kind of do what they want. And they started following him. He wasn't a violent man, but he was kind of outspoken. And they incarcerated him in May of '69. And then 4 months later he was pronounced dead. And this was like, the summer of love, right, '69. And the first landing on the moon and other things. And in South Africa, massive atrocities were going on. The day of his funeral, there were huge crowds, like 30,000 people in the street in Cape Town, came out to bury him. And there were earth tremors that day. There was an earthquake in Tulbagh, and the tremors were felt in Cape Town. So, take it as you want. But the myth that surrounded him, Allah is wrath against the oppressors and whatever. And then since then, there were people who had dreams about him. And he's become an icon definitely amongst the Muslim community of South Africa. So, I was born in '75 in London, so I didn't meet him. But trying to understand an identity of myself, or not even trying, avoiding all of that. I'm into, as a youngster in London during the 80s and the early 90s, it's about music, it's about styling, it's about getting high, and basically escaping all those identity issues, really. But within that, there is a search for identity. Only through the process of coming to South Africa to try to make the film about my grandfather, then I'm understanding actually his struggle was about identity. He was asserting his Islamic identity, but fighting for the identity of people around him. And then I start to question and look back on those days in London when I would get called, names across the spectrum. I would be called a nigger. I would be called a paki, right? And so I could never be placed, and I could never place myself. So then, that's why the Islamic understanding for me is the kind of identity that.
Are you Muslim and practicing?
Yeah, practicing Muslim. My father's Libyan, and he's old school Libyan. So.
What do you mean?
He grew up in a village in the south of Tripoli, and his family have always been Libyan as far as I know. So they're always practicing Islam since Islam came to that land. And my mother's family, apparently there's some Irish blood somewhere. But apart from that, it's Islamic, right? So yeah, I was brought up with an understanding of Islam that was kind of routinized, right? Understanding of belief was there, which is like the basis, but it was like going through the motions. So when I was in my teenage years, I didn't mind not obliging to the devotional practices because there wasn't that deep level of understanding. Only later, but I always knew there was more.
But it's funny because it looks like you have all these solid backgrounds, but you don't really know where this journey will get you.
Oh yeah? I don't think no one. I know no one knows really where it will get us. Yeah, no one knows.
It actually reminds me a little bit.
If we knew the journey would be boring.
Because
the journey.
what is very interesting is that she did a film on her father actually also as a quest. It is very interesting actually because Claude's father was the most important African film critic, but in Europe.
Yeah.
But he was French, white. So she made a film on him to discover Africa in a way and to connect with filmmaking somehow, which actually also is part of this transformation process, not just in life, but in also the actual decision you're making to do some work.
The decision, I think it's a very important word, you know. And what I find interesting here also is that, you know, we all have opportunity to live somewhere else, you know, or we can decide where we want to live. And now you, the English guy, you are in South Africa, me, the French, Congolese one, I'm in South Africa, Katarina, the Swedish something, is in South Africa. Chris, you have the opportunity to live in Finland, you're in South Africa. I don't know about you, but you'll tell me, but I think this decision is also a decision and a mission. And maybe you can talk about your work, you know, as Khaled, the work, why in Africa now, you know? What the importance to be on the continent?
It's not about Africa or the space. It's about what you do. And it could be anywhere. I'm not going to limit myself to just doing work in Africa. Because Europeans don't fucking do that, why must I do it? Americans don't do that, why must I do it? I mean, fine, we can do things in Africa, but I'm not going to limit myself to Africa. But there's going to be a degree of Afrocentrism or making sense of us in relation to the rest of the world, wherever I go and interrogate what's happening. And for me, that's how I approach what I do.
So when you say Afrocentrism, it's like you look at the world as an African. You don't want to lose that point of view.
Yeah, that's where I'm from. But I'm not necessarily going to do it in this space. Because I don't think we should limit ourselves there.
So is that going out to the world, but not forgetting the perspective?
I mean, that's it. Because for me, humans by nature are migrators. I mean, we've been moving around. The Americas have only been populated after the last ice age. Before that, no humans lived there. You know what I mean? Or during the last ice age. That's how they kind of got through, at the end of the last ice age. From Russia, they went over the Bering Strait. They populated America, and by the time the white man got there, they'd already been right all the way down to the south. You know what I mean? Complex societies with lots of different languages and stuff like that. So, and that's in a very short space of time. You look at how long our species has been around. And, you know, it does sometimes, when one looks at the world that way, our little problems do sometimes seem insignificant.
Katrina, for example, one of the things that is very interesting is that, let's say our ambition is to have a world without foreigners.
Wouldn't that be lovely?
So, I mean, I'm just wanting to pick up on that. Like, with your work, how do you see that process of trying to create a world where there's no foreigners, or just one, you know, species, you know, human beings, you know, and then you can create this?
I think you do it by making a decision for yourself. I'm not going to limit myself. It's a bit like what you talked about. Like, I can be wherever. It's always a big fuss, you know. I remember once a colleague of mine were talking about a highly qualified man from Zimbabwe who was in Latin America, and he was like, oh, it's amazing, he's in Latin America. It's not going to, like, we are allowed to be wherever. Africans can be in China, in Cambodia, in wherever. And we claim the space where we're in. And also, if someone else chooses to label you as a foreigner, tant pis, it's their problem, you know. I think I'm going to try not to feel like a foreigner anywhere. And if I project that image of me, I'm welcome everywhere, I'm a part of everywhere, I'm like Chris, a citizen of the world.
But we shouldn't forget that actually this world is making laws for immigration, building walls, you know,